What's up guys, Cameron here from Drums and Drams, and in today's video, I'm gonna be taking a look at Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch A123. So this is the very first Elijah Craig Barrel Proof to hit shelves this year, and honestly, when there's a product like this that I know I'm gonna get my hands on, I know I'm gonna make a review for it, I try to steer clear of other people's reviews, you know, whether they're talking positively or negatively about it. I don't want it to influence what I'm thinking about that particular whiskey, but I couldn't help myself with A123. I was excited, so I clicked on a few of my friends' YouTube videos. I wanted to see what they had to say, and I think overall the consensus is a positive one, and I think really it's kind of an optimistic outlook, especially when you look at how Elijah Craig Barrel Proof has been performing over the last couple years. 2021 was not a great year for Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, in my opinion. I think a lot of people might agree with that as well. But then 2022, it seemed like we might be back on sort of an upward trajectory to possibly bring back those flavors that we were missing, the flavors from 2017 all the way up to 2020, particularly basically talking about the new bottle design, which this was new in 2017. If you go back to those years between 17 and 20, you're gonna be hard pressed to find a bad batch or even a slightly lesser batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. I think those were kind of the golden years for this brand, especially as whiskey became more popular, bourbon more in vogue, more in demand. People flocked to this stuff because of the low price point, the 12-year age statement, you know, non-chill filtered, barrel proof, all of the good things that we love to see from a legacy distillery like Heaven Hill. And I think that, again, brought a lot of people into the fold and made them fans of this line. But to be honest, 2021 was such a rough year that I think some of those fans may have felt a little weird about the brand. Maybe I'm overstepping by saying that, I don't know. But also, if you're a new whiskey lover, which we are seeing so many people getting into whiskey right now, if you started with the 2021 batches, even if you like them, I think you don't quite understand what you're missing if you haven't tried anything from 2020 and before. So that's kind of like the general setup here. I have A123, again, I'm gonna nose, taste, and review this first. C922 to kind of check against the latest batch. And then finally, I've got B520 over here, kind of a cult favorite of ECBP fans. It's a similar proof point to the other two. It's a very balanced profile, easy drinker, you know, nothing crazy in any direction, just a really solid representation of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. The final thing to say here, if I haven't already, is that A123 is coming in at 125.6 proof. Less talking, more smelling whiskey. Let's see what we get here on the nose. All right, guys, so I don't want to overhype this thing too much, especially since I'm just now getting into the nose, but I've got to say it smells incredible. It is a very abnormally dark batch of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, and I guess we'll find out if that's true when I compare it to these other two at the end of the video. But big molasses note, big brown sugar chocolate, tons of oak, tons of funky oak actually, and funky leather, almost kind of like a Knob Creek, a Knob Creek 18 type profile when you think of just how leathery and funky that Jim Beam distillate gets after, you know, 15 to 18 years. If you have a bottle of this and you crack it open, I think the minute you pour this thing out and start nosing it, you are not going to be sad that you own this batch, this A123. I gotta keep nosing it before I can taste it, but I am very excited for when I do get to taste it here in just a couple minutes. Yeah, so now let's talk about a couple of maybe lesser notes in here. One of those is sort of a smoky, you could say barrel char, but in this case, I think it's actually kind of a smoky quality to it in the background. It's just hanging out in the background. It's a supporting note. There is definitely some fruitiness in here as well. The previous batches in 2022, I noticed on those that I was getting a lot of burnt orange pretty consistently, and I would say that that burnt orange note is also at play in A123, but in A123, you're actually getting some additional dark fruit notes, kind of in like the plum territory, I think. Yeah, plum, I would say maybe even some dark cherry notes in here. So what I'm really trying to say about this is that it's hitting on a lot of different qualities, a lot of different parts of the flavor wheel or pyramid or whatever kind of geometric shape you want to use. We're getting tons of sweet, we're getting a lot of oaky kind of aged notes, really nice aromatic spices. I wouldn't say there's really anything sour, but certainly some fruit going on in here, more on the dry, darker fruit kinds of notes. And yes, there's a little bit of like this mintiness, this menthol cooling sensation. So I am excited to get this on the palate. I have something that I think I'm gonna say about this bourbon. I need to take one sip before I can confirm that I wanna say it, because it's gonna be kind of like, well, it's something that it puts a target on my back. Like, you could call me crazy for saying something like that. So let me get this on the palate and see what it's like. Cheers, guys. The palate just explodes, and it is so, there are so many dark fruits. It's extremely sweet. There's actually a little bit of vanilla hanging out on the palate that I wasn't quite getting on the nose. I think that vanilla, because it's a brighter note, was a little bit masked by the ethanol and like the menthol sensation that I was getting. On the palate, the vanilla is a little bit more clear. And in fact, like, the chocolate note as well is a little bit clearer on the palate. There is a little bit of like a burnt quality to this whiskey overall, and I think that's something that we've been seeing from Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, maybe, you know, 2021, 2022. But in the case of some of those batches, like I think B521 in particular for me, just tasted really burnt. This batch has a little bit of that, but it's kept in check by some of the other notes. And so I don't think it really is taking anything away from the whiskey. And the thing that I mentioned just a second ago that I thought could be controversial, I'm gonna say it. I think if Heaven Hill 17 is the Budweiser or the Miller, whatever, of whiskey, this is Heaven Hill 17 Light or Miller Light or Bud Light. Like, this is really reminding me, and I wish I could do the side-by-side comparison right now, but I don't have any Heaven Hill 17, but it's really reminding me of that Heaven Hill 17 profile. That's exciting because we're talking about a $70 bottle with pretty decent availability across the country, whatever market you're in. And so to be able to kind of simulate that experience, or at least one that even reminds me of Heaven Hill 17, it's really exciting. So let's go in for one more sip, and then we'll get to the comparisons here. Yeah, so second sip on this one, it really starts to drink quite a bit easier. I'm getting actually some black tea notes, which I don't know that I've ever gotten from an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, but maybe like a black tea note, even in some ways maybe an orange tea kind of note, because I talked about those burnt orange qualities on the nose. So maybe black tea, maybe orange tea, but certainly some sort of tea note. As nerdy as that might sound, or as maybe out of place, I can't get myself away from thinking about it. Nice long finish. I've got heartburn right now, but I still think it's a really nice Kentucky hug, a really nice finish here. So let's stop talking about A123 or Heaven Hill 17 Light right now. Let's move on to C922, which I did review here on the channel. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Now we're gonna see what this one's like. I'll just do kind of a quick side-by-side because I don't wanna bog this thing down. So C922 on the nose, it's coming off a little bit more lively. There's some more freshness to this, particularly with the fruit notes, but it doesn't quite have the depth or the darkness, of course. I mean, A123 is so uncharacteristically dark with its profile. Basically, C922 doesn't quite have like the molasses, the really dark chocolate kind of notes, but it does have, again, this more sprightly profile, at least as sprightly as like an Elijah Craig Barrel Proof can be. And it also has a little bit more of like an atomic fireball cinnamon. So where I would consider A123 to be a little more of an aromatic cinnamon stick, cinnamon bark kind of thing, C922 is coming off a little bit, you know, sharper and brighter on the cinnamon. So now I'm gonna taste C922 and do this comparison very quickly. And all of that carries through to the palate as well. Much fresher, much brighter. I still really like the whiskey, but I think A123 really differentiates itself just because of how oaky, how leathery, how dark it is. Both fantastic whiskeys. I think A123 for me, because it's just so different, it's a little more novel in that way. I think it's gonna be really cool to see if maybe the brand continues in this direction, if they refine this. And in some ways, A123 right now is coming off to me like, I said Heaven Hill 17, but even the Old Fitz 17 and some other releases we've seen from Heaven Hill recently with higher age statements, it has notes from those whiskeys with those higher age statements. It's really remarkable for a 12-year product. So last but not least now, I'm gonna go over to B520. It's a little bit of a higher proof here. It's 127.2 as compared to the 125.6 of A123. So let's see what we get on the nose from B520. Oh yeah, that's just all butterscotch. In fact, like in this lineup, B520 actually smells, I would say 50 to 60% of it smells like a dusty bourbon. Yeah, it smells really, really good. But I think there's something lacking a little bit, like in terms of complexity. B520 is extremely balanced. It's a great quintessential profile, but actually I think that the A123, yeah, I think the A123 might be a little more complex on the nose, which is interesting and maybe not what I expected, considering B520 is such a fan favorite batch. So now it's time to taste the B520 and see how it stacks up. B520 in some ways is a little bit of a one-trick pony, but the one trick is a very good trick. That stuff is delicious. And I don't know if I could pick a favorite between B520 and A123. The reason I say that is because I just think they're kind of maxing out what they do in their own ways, but what they do is very different. A123 feels like a more modern whiskey, but a darker whiskey, if that makes sense. Whereas B520 feels like a little bit of a brighter, but maybe more rustic, more dusty kind of whiskey. If I had to rank these, I don't know exactly how I do it. Maybe we just tie these two for first and C922 is in a close second. Either way, the whole point of this is just to see how A123 stacks up against the most recent batch and a fan favorite batch. I think it stacks up very, very well. And if I were you, if you see this on the shelf, grab 2 or 3 if you can. I mean, seriously, at 70 bucks, I think up to 90, maybe $100 tops on A123 is what I would be willing to pay for multiple bottles. I really do think it's that good. So I'm gonna do one final sip here of A123. A little bit of a Coca-Cola note on that last sip, continuing to show just how dark it is. It's not flat, which is nice. You might expect flat from a darker whiskey. I don't think it's flat, but I do think it kind of smooths out after a couple of sips. All in all, you're not gonna be disappointed. High ratings for all of these. I'm excited for Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Can't wait to see what the next batch is gonna be like, which is gonna be, well, not A123, that's a great name though, 123. The next one's gonna be B523. So I can't wait to see what we get from B523. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time here on Drums and Drams.